I'm excited to welcome Louis on the stage. Louis, will you like to introduce yourself to the community?
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name's Louis. I've been on one of these before and I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me back. You might recognize me because there's some screenshots of my face in this FigJam file, but I am a designer advocate of Figma, and I'm kind of here to help you onboard to the new features as much as possible and generally answer any questions, have debates. I know Tiago's got some spicy discussions in the file already, so we're going to try and have some good discussions today. Over to Raquel.
Yeah, thank you, Luis. I'm Raquel. I'm from Portugal. I'm the design operations at the moment, managing design system and for design process as natural in design operations. And I'm also part of Friends of Figma Portugal. I can leave the link so you can follow up some events here in Portugal. And yeah, feel free to reach out in case you are also a design system geek, as I am. And I'm very excited with this new updates. And now I can pass it to Tiago.
Yeah, let's see if I do this a bit different than last time. No, I'm a product designer. I've been doing this for a while, specializing a lot now in design systems and DesignOps. I was born in Lisbon, but I've lived in Sweden for the last 8 years. Some of the places I worked at were Ericsson, Klarna, and Mentimeter. Now I'm in between jobs, so if anyone's looking out, now's the time before I go. That's it. Thank you for it. Thank you, Raquel and Louis.
Thank you. So my name is Farid. I'm based in Mountain View, California, and I'm Friends of Figma DesignOps chapter lead. Excited to welcome all of you here. So the goal of our session today is to explore and master Figma's new features to drive innovation and efficiency in design systems. I wanted to ask 3 questions, and that will be an interesting part here to understand your reactions of config and new features. Louis, would you like to start and share your reactions based on the results here?
Yeah, the first one, I'm maybe we're going to contest the question a little bit. It kind of suggests that design didn't have an influence or was losing influence before. And I don't know, I'm not sure if I agree with that. I feel like design is kind of in an upward trajectory of influence over the past decade. There might have needed to be maybe a freshening up, and that maybe is what people are reacting to. Design, I feel as if because we're kind of opening the doors more, and this is later what Tiago mentioned, opening the doors more to more people being able to contribute to design, maybe that's where the influence is being increased. And I would argue that's a good thing. There are obviously boundaries you want to set, and we don't want everybody designing everything. But I think that the reaction here is overwhelmingly positive. So I guess that's in the right direction.
Love it. So the second question were around AI. Tiago, would you like to share your perspective on that, your reactions on the results?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag there. From my side, I was very excited to see Diagram getting acquired, but we didn't really see that much of a application on the Figma side yet, and that's understandable. No one was expecting it. I think maybe there was a bit of hype, but Figma tends to do things in a very thoughtful way. So, of course, as a tool for designers, you're not going to just forget about your user base pretty much. So I think it's expected.
Love it. Thank you very much for sharing your reactions. And the last question is, Raquel, would you like to share your observations here?
Yeah, I think Figma does one thing very well, which is listen to their user feedback. And I think most of the new updates were a little bit of mirror of that. So eventually it will also change the process because it's things that are being requested. Therefore, eventually will also influence process, mostly with design system management and the ops teams and so on. So I'm very excited to see how time efficient we can be with these new updates and so on. So yeah, I
think the hope here really is that the significant change is that it reduces double work or reduces the inefficiency that we had before.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah. And I feel that, so I'm very hopeful.
Love it. The first section that we wanted to go through is config reactions. So the first one is new dev mode experience. And I feel I don't need to explain all these features because everyone was following all these config there are so many recordings, so many tweets around config. So I don't feel we need to explain all these new features. Everyone is very familiar with them. The second one is variables, and I see that variables are getting a lot of upvotes. Advanced prototyping, modes, and others. So I saw, Raquel, you added a couple interesting notes here. Would you like to start maybe with variables and share your perspective? And please spotlight yourself in FigJam so we could follow you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just some thoughts and some reactions, and double check me if I'm wrong, Luis, in case I misunderstood something. So one of two things regarding ops, sometimes we would to hide some styles because eventually we just want to create some styles for components. And when I saw this site from publishing, I felt they were listening to me, So it's just a tiny detail, but I felt it was really interesting. And then regarding the specs itself, go ahead. And
just to add on top of that, if you, and this is probably quite likely that you have hundreds, if not thousands of variables that you're creating. There is a way. So this feature is great where you can hide from publishing. You can also use the underscore or period at the front of a name trick on a collection to hide the entire collection from publishing.
Like we do with components, right?
Exactly.
That's the same trick. Yeah. And good.
Or additionally, if you want to hide the collection when you publish, you can also use the unchecking in the publishing window. So if you don't want to go through every single variable, and you can do it in those other two ways. This is probably going to be defined by how you structure the collections too. If you're thinking about a primitive semantic definition, those primitives will probably not want to be published, so you can just hide the entire collection there.
Yeah. And that's the excitement that I've felt with that, because eventually you don't want to overwhelm the people outside that don't manage the design system, and just give them the useful or the relevant variables. And for me, it was very interesting. And then I reacted a little bit with this variable specs, which I found it was very interesting because they were more code CSS friendly stuff that we can also map the corridor radius and the spacing. Sometimes I had this difficulty versus when I was doing documentation for spacing. How can we tell designers to pattern spacing, right? Because it's a challenging one. So having variables that reflects that, for me, it was really a huge thing to have now.
I have a question. When you're thinking about the scoping of these variables, let's take, for example, corner radius or gap. Are you thinking about those as different variables for each different application, or would you look at one big collection for sizes?
Yeah, for now, the brainstorm that I've done alone, I was thinking the basics ones, so we can patternize, for instance, sizes with buttons, let's say, or drop downs and so ever. So it will be global values at first, and then eventually we can evolve on that. But I think, as you were mentioning, there's multiple possibilities here. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm always trying to think how all these new things will evolve the way how we work from DesignOps perspective. Maybe I feel, this hidden collections is a great, interesting thing that we need to add it to our playbooks, making sure that, as Louis mentioned, we're not overwhelming our design system customers, right? So I added some notes, and please add some sticky notes on the side as well. If you have some interesting learnings, it will be great to get your other perspective as well.
Yeah. And also, this is a future improvement, not that big of a deal. But for instance, I felt this on other plugins, as I was mentioned. When you are writing on input, it could be interesting to have also a suggestion when you were writing, because at the moment you have to go to libraries and click. So have to do another step. But of course, this will be improvements that eventually will catch up.
We're getting there. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. And also, last but not least, I put it here because I wasn't sure in which box I should put it. I think this one is a little bit lost, and maybe we can talk later because it's about plugins. So never mind.
And I feel one of the interesting new ways how other tools are evolving is, instead of Autocomplete, they are also have auto-suggestion feature by using AI models that will, based on specific patterns or behaviors or
Yeah.
naming conventions, it could suggest, oh, instead of searching and finding, here are 3 suggestions that you might be interested in.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when you're stuck, right? Okay, which value we should choose, because eventually you have to pattern inside of the team. Then you can do design audits for the product designers, but then you have other stakeholders to manage, developers and so on. So an AI suggested might also be good, Knowing our realities, what do you think, machine? What do you think that we should use now? That could be interesting. Yeah.
Or just the most popular ones from the people that are
Yeah.
picking it all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, exactly. Because you don't manage to be everywhere. So AI can help on that, to be more present on the field, let's say.
Yeah, if you're designing a form, you probably want the tokens for the form, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's great. Tiago, I saw that you added a lot of notes around dev mode. Are you excited to
Oh,
share
yeah.
your reactions there?
Let me find it first.
And please spotlight yourself.
Oh, yeah. Spotlight me. Now it's that wait where you're kind of waiting for people. Look, I was a kid on the candy store with all of this stuff, but I'm like more the dev mode guy that got excited because
Yeah.
I don't know what if we need to do specs anymore.
Mhm.
And that's amazing, even for designers. But if you check dev mode, you have stuff, the component playground, where developers can go and check what the component properties are. So to keep it aligned with what they're doing, that's
Yeah.
amazing. And then the fire stuff is the plugin for VS Code, the extension. I already installed it. I tried it out, and I have a lot of developers that would use this and would not open Figma, or would have to be forced to open Figma. And this is amazing. I was actually watching the talk about dev mode, and you can actually also get the comments there, which is something that devs
Oh,
always miss,
amazing.
like the comments when you reply to them. So you
Yeah.
can get that there. You can get the files that you opened last. It's amazing. But there's like so many other things on dev mode that's insane. I don't even know where to start.
It's my favorite thing about it is that you can use cursor chat in there as well.
Oh,
So the developer in VS Code can chat with you in Figma via cursor chat. So they
Amazing.
jump back to do that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so
That was a really nice surprise when I saw that one.
yeah. And now you have more stuff even for designers. You have inline prototyping preview. So now you can press Shift Enter or Shift Space to get basically your prototype view very small. So you can check what did I do? Did I mess something up now? And there's one very for nerds of design systems, which is the rich
yeah.
text on the component description. I was using so many tricks, double dash and stuff, so I could format this, and now I have this. It's gonna be amazing.
Love I'm curious jump into that documentation a little bit more, just to hear what you're all doing before rich text and whether this will change that going forward.
Yeah, I think we were mostly using uppercase to make it bold, and then
some
double
space
hyphen.
between. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when you had alternative names, for instance, where you put keywords for the components for people to find it in search.
I
You'd
use
have
that
to
a
add
lot.
like a little dash so they didn't look description.
Yeah.
So now, it's you can be creative.
Yeah, for sure.
I wanted to ask, I see that a lot of teams, they are using Figma not only as a design tool, but also for documenting their components, right? So I know some teams are switching into Confluence, Storybook, or maybe Zero Height or any other tools, but a lot of people are documenting things in Figma because it's easier for them. But the issue there from Ops perspective is that only designers have access to contribute and add on, edit things. So do you feel right now, by using this functionality, designers will not document things in Figma as a part of the frame? They will document that in this component description field. Do you feel this field is enough, or are we ready to move this? And as designers, please do not document anything in Figma itself as a part of the frame. Please document this in the part of description. We are in the stage right now. That's a good transition.
Sorry, but no.
Why? Why? Please elaborate.
Look, I've actually been documenting some design systems in Figma. And the reason for that is we failed to secure budget for any other platform, Zero
Yeah,
Light.
I was going to say
And
that.
Storybook is not designer friendly. So you will never get the designer there. So for designers, normal documentation is somewhere in Figma, which creates a problem also because the more layers you have, the bigger the file gets, the most performance you can start having. So we shouldn't really do that. But designers find it there. So it's a bit of a catch-22 there.
Yeah.
I think we're entering a different world now where you can, you mentioned earlier about reducing the need for red lines and specs, but we still need to document what is in our head. And where that currently lives, I think is where Farid's getting at, is where does that live? Who should be maintaining it? Who should be owning it? And it could be in a bunch of different places or not at all. So I think that every single team will now need to look and say, where do we want to put the specs for this entire flow? Would it be alongside the canvas? Would it be in an external doc? Would it be in somewhere else? I don't know. And that's something to be decided and probably an opportunity for us to pay attention to.
Yeah. I think it also depends on how the company is organized when it comes to documentation. For instance, for those teams or company that don't have that extra budget to have an external Coda, Notion, or Frontify, and so on, I think Figma now is providing a good response to doing documentation. But if you are used to, for instance, do those kind of image do's and don'ts and so on, and do bigger documentation, maybe it's not that quite there yet, but maybe it's a possibility in the future to consider. So, and for companies, you will reduce another tool, right? So a lot of potential here.
Yeah. I'm
But I
thinking
think sorry, I was just on the topic because they were showing on the dev mode that you could create plugins to actually show the documentation inline inside the panel. And you could do that for design also. Maybe not right now, but soon.
Yeah. You know what I was excited about, I was looking for is embedded analytics into Figma. So I hope somebody will create. Right now, we are doing this exercise on measuring the impact of our design system. So, and we're using some hacks to use cookies instead of API because API is not available there. And all these cookies are expired in every 3 days. So we need to always update all of that. But we can pull this data, show it in Power BI or in Coda, and communicate what's the coverage, how many teams are using our libraries, what is the percentage of the adoption and all of that. I feel it will be great if somebody will able to do. First of all, if Figma will introduce analytics API for our organizations, that will be great because within dev resources, it always interesting for me when designers are working on design system, they don't have enough context on the usage itself. But in Figma Analytics, you could see how many instances, how many detachments, and just having instances and detachments might not be a good data here. But if you will calculate the ratio, it might be something interesting. And it will say, oh, out of your library, we can see that these top 10 components are not performing well. So there is low amount of instances, but there is high amount of detachments. Maybe you should revisit that. And that will help design system team to prioritize things better. And I feel this might be an interesting shift in the future.
Yeah, there is an argument that data can be data, but you need to know what you want to do with it.
Yeah,
and we could give you every single layer information about somebody's moving it, and that will give you loads of stuff to look at, but you wouldn't necessarily know what to do with it. Just to give you some context about the way we look at analytics too, is that design system analytics is incredibly heavy on our servers and it's generated live all the time for millions of users. So we are also rethinking about what is the best way to give people what they need. And I personally would love just to kind of close it down and give an API so you can decide what you want to. But for have access internally to developers, that might not be the best solution. So trying to work out what is the minimum viable analytics for people on orgs, and how can that be extended by effectively you to build what you need in your reports as well. So we're thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. And one small feature request there is detachments data in Figma Analytics is not allowing us to see which team actually detached where.
Yeah.
Because all this data is related to the component, but not to the team. And the reason why we want that is ask these teams, why they're actually detaching it. So we could see the edge cases that we are not covering for this specific product portfolio. So it will be really great to have that as part of API as well.
Yeah, good feedback.
Great. Yeah. And I would love to share some of the things that we've been doing for analytics.
I know you're doing some really nuts things behind the scenes. I've seen something.
Yeah. Great. So yeah, I feel this component documentation supporting Markdown is really powerful. I feel this is the first step. Hopefully in the future, there will be more integrated documentation. And also you could use API to pull this data. What we've been doing before is that by mapping design components with Storybook components, you could pull some data for engineers because all these comments are available in inspect mode. I need to revisit all of that with this new dev mode feature. And it was interesting for engineers to see that, okay, for this specific component, we already have that in Jira. So people could see who is the author of this component when it was last edited, and also see how to find a specific Figma component in Storybook with the link directly. So they need to search in Figma and then search on their Storybook and then do all of that. So yeah, this is really...
We don't want people to have to check the same thing twice.
Yeah. That's true.
That's a good goal.
Yeah.
Challenging goal.
By the way, during the demo, I've seen one example where within the Visual Studio Code, they had recommendation on which component to use from engineer side. But when I was checking the documentation, I couldn't find anything that. Is that something new that wasn't released yet? Or do you have any? Because the challenge that we are facing is, first of all, the previous session that we had is how to connect design and code together. And this is really time-consuming exercise. But by using AI and by using other tools like Coda, you could map all these things based on the naming conventions. It's still not perfect, but it could do 80% of the work. But with this Visual Studio Code demo that we had during the config, there was a specific use case where the person selected component in Figma and it suggested component in engineering. Is that based on the Storybook dev resources link, or is it based on it analyzes the structure of the Figma frames?
It was it's basically using a type ahead. So as you start typing, it synchronizes what the typing is matching based off the Figma source. There might just be an extension that you haven't installed inside VS Code yet to synchronize those libraries.
Great, because that will be great if engineers
would rely on the dev mode plugin side too to cross-reference what is in Figma and what's in VS Code.
Yeah, maybe we could another session around that. That will be interesting to get more on that, shine more light into that. Great. Tiago, thank you very much for sharing all of that. So let's do a quick recap. I feel the winner here is variables. Everyone loves variables. It's like 30 upvotes here. Dev mode is always 12. That's because of the audience. We don't have any engineers on this session, so it's
in the future we might have more, perhaps.
Yeah. Advanced prototyping. This is great. I feel I was missing these Axure capabilities that we had a couple years back. Nobody is using Axure anymore for prototyping. And also Framer had these calculations, but I'm happy that right now in Figma, we have this functionality built in. The modes are really great. And also, I saw that you also added some slides around that. If people want to read more about this feature, the best way is to play with them through Figma Playground. They published all their resources there, so we highly recommend to check it out. Tiago, you shared your favorite talks. Would you like to share quick?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a short one. I love Rasmus. Rasmus was one of the founders of Spotify. He gave the nerdiest talk ever, and it was great. Then he stayed around for questions for a long time. They almost got kicked him out. So it was an awesome one. And actually, on my website, I actually have an attribution to him because I use Inter. So that's pretty much a taken. And then we had a really good talk by RL dude. He's the lead of Weno, and they got acquired by Twitter, and then he got into a fight with Elon Musk. So this is a really nice guy, has a tough life, so really good one. Dan is great. Dan is amazing, and he kind of punched that thing that he's been talking about of, hey, just don't start with buttons, start with something that has a great impact,
Yeah.
so you can prove value, and that's how you convince everyone to give you budget. So that was a really good one. And then I really loved, especially the second part about content design at Figma, because of the Easter eggs. And you shouldn't use Easter eggs. And at some point, it's showing all of this old stuff that you thought didn't have Easter eggs, but they actually had it. And then I just showed that while I was working at Mentimeter, I had a little bit of, the skip slide feature. And then I just added like a Pac-Man ghost that only some people ever found about.
Love it.
Amazing.
Great. So let's check out the questions if we have any. The first question is, Kay asked, with variables available, are color styles becoming obsolete? How do you divide the use cases? We will go back in variables in a second. That's our second section. We have lots of questions to Louis as well. So we'll love to go deeper into that. The next question is there a way to easily edit collections? For example, I've created separate color collections based on the use, but then decided it would be better to just have one colors collection and have groups. Would I have to recreate the collection, or can I add different collections together? I saw that there are some plugins, right?
This is why planning is very important. And as with any design system release, we need to know what we want to achieve before we start doing it and releasing things.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, this could become a really big breaking change for your design system. So let's be very cautious and careful about just rolling things out, creating things, and then deciding they don't need to live there. But to actually answer the question, that is what you want to do, create separate color collections based off their use. So semantic and primitive and component, if you go to that level. If you want to have one collection, or if you want to split collections up, this is where you'd need to use the plugins to export and import them in. Right now, there is no way to cut and paste variables across collections. There's no way to drag and drop things across different collections. So just be very intentional before you go and build what your plan is. And that's why I think taking a step back, jumping into a FigJam file even, and starting to map things out might allow you to save yourself some head scratching a little bit later.
Love it.
I've been there also. Don't worry. I've been there before.
And for me, it's a really interesting topic about breaking changes that design system is doing, because again, at larger scale, we need to think more, as you mentioned, Louis, that we need to plan things ahead. And I would love to hear your perspective on how easy it is to break variables if we are changing them during the fly, right? In production.
Yeah.
Another question that we have from Ron, do you feel there is still a use case for Token Studio, or is variables intended to eliminate the need for that from the day one?
I wouldn't say we have a goal of completely wiping Token Studio out. I think that might be unfair. And Token Studio is a very rich platform, and they're even extending it now to have a web-based platform where you can build out your token relationships. So I think it's incredibly powerful. Just there are other alternative tools for documenting designs and extending Figma. So things can work in tandem. It kind of depends what's your use case and how far do you want to go. If your use case right now is, I want to be able to switch colors light and dark mode, variables is going to be able to support you immediately. If your use case right now is white labeled design system with 50 different brands, all using different typography stacks, Token Studio is going to be the way to go. So measure out what you need to do right now, and then your solution should be able to support you as you go forward with that. Obviously, in the future, we're going to be planning to support more different types of variable and different ways to manage that. Right now, you're comparing variables version 1 with Token Studio version 3 years later.
Love it. There is another ops question. How will from Dante? 1 second, switching up and down. How will variables affect memory usage, memory limits that our designers often hit? Note, we have stacked libraries and components core design systems, business unit, library, and product library. What are your thoughts? I feel like you're the one who can answer this question. So.
I can try. If you start to roll out variables into your design system and it means that you consolidate components or reduce components, that's a performance win. If you're increasing complexity and increasing bloat, as you can imagine, that will decrease the performance. So what you probably want to think about is what potential components or variants can be reduced or deleted from our libraries now. But like I said before, that's a breaking change. So plan that out in your systems before you go and do it. But I think I showed this in the deep dive session that if you think about components with densities that you're using, you can almost remove those from the system if you plan out your collections appropriately. So just think about, do we need this component now? Can it be replaced with a variant or not? And then that should help you improve performance. But ultimately, performance is about size of or amount of things in a file. And if your library file is still humongous, that might be a different discussion that we need to have how can we slice this library up into ways that make it easier to manage, maintain, and use? You might need more library files, regardless of variables.
Yeah.
I have a bit of a shameless plug here because I have an entire talk about failing to scale a library. And I really got to the point where it actually crashed, right? Just on my side, because just on the side of the library, fortunately. And then I had in 7 days to refactor everything. So
wow.
Yeah, be careful with the bloat. If you can split it into smaller pieces, but also if you can avoid using base component now that you have component properties,
for sure.
that will save your life.
We don't base components. We don't.
But the way how I learned about base components is through Figma documentation. So it's there.
I apologize about that.
By the way, another interesting part here is we could divide previous discussion that we had is around how to map design and engineering. So engineers might have some interesting approaches on how to not only separate different libraries based on the business units, based on the product libraries, but also have it more behavior specific. For example, data visualizations is a very large library usually. So that's why I see a lot of teams are separating visualizations from the core library, having it on the side, the same way how engineers are doing their things as well. So they have this use case specific libraries, and by mapping all of that, that also could help in the future. So having more detailed ones. Great. So we have lots of questions. I don't feel we will able to cover all of them, but we have another topic that we wanted to go really deeper even more into the variables. So we really enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
Just screenshot it. We already have it as a playbook. So this is really, really great thinking exercise on how to understand the variables, modes, and all of that. So you've shared that to a lot of people, and I feel like a lot of people came back with some feedback. So what is the most challenging thing, or what is the most favorite feedback that you've got from people, maybe some learning or insight that wow, this is interesting.
Yeah. Just for your information as well, that before this session happened, it was not supposed to be recorded. So we had planned for something very different.
Wow.
Really?
Right. I'm glad that it landed. So the most surprising thing is how people are planning to migrate their styles to variables. I didn't anticipate people would still keep the style, but feed it with a variable. I didn't see that coming at all. So that was nice to see it, nice to be surprised by how people approach the release. The most challenging thing is that people did different things. So we anticipated people using it a certain way. They're using it in different ways, which is amazing. Continue to change how features should or could be used, and it keeps us on our feet. I guess the thing that keeps coming up and up and up is, what do we do with styles now? It's a question that is coming up every hour. Is somebody's asking, do I remove styles, or should I keep them, or what do we do? Should I or switch to variables? Or that confusion is quite a challenge.
Yeah. I also put here a little bit close, because we're talking about it, some plugins already to do this switch, for instance, because the reaction was, at least when I was on LinkedIn, how can we manage to switch styles to variables? So it was very interesting. It was not creating variables, but to switch styles to variables, which was very interesting. And I think that thought, Luis, is because I think at least my team, for instance, we created styles already design token friendly. So I think that there's set up, okay, then if they're already variables friendly, let's just switch to one place to another. So I suspect that people have that tendency.
That's a really good approach. I think the challenge that a lot of people have is that maybe they hadn't structured styles in a semantic way before. They were maybe in a designer friendly naming convention, which is totally fine. But that introduces confusion about, where does a variable live?
Yeah.
And then you end up spending 6 months thinking of a naming convention. So it's a challenge to get that ball rolling, but it's a good thing to start doing.
Yeah. And I think the challenging also to create formulas that for new needs, you eventually just set up easily. And I think that's also the challenge. Okay, on semantic groups or collection, if I want a new color, how can I name it? And try to anticipate that. I think that's the most funny challenge, let's say.
Yeah, because this is brand new for for a lot of teams. It's thinking in that way, which can be really overwhelming, and you basically don't know where to start. So maybe as a bit of reassurance, there are lots of other people in everybody's similar situation now, and that's totally fine. These things take time. Don't rush. You'll get there eventually.
Yeah. I also put here some thoughts at the end. Eventually have to convince people above us to give some time in our backlog to do these changes, because eventually they think, oh, that's not a priority right now. So eventually that's also a good point.
I think that the return on investment in an immediate way is trying to figure out how long it takes to design in light and dark mode, and the endless switching of styles and whatever way you're doing that can be reduced down massively. And if you multiply that by every designer, that's a huge saving cost.
Yeah.
Love it. I have a question from ops perspective. So when we are working with larger teams and we have this new Figma capabilities, it's important to make more collaborative decisions on the way how we could plan and how we could organize these variables. So Louis, have you developed or came across any interesting frameworks or ideas for conducting workshops with design system teams to establish the right variables? Do you have any ideas? Maybe having open source template in FigJam will be great to start. So a lot of teams are going through that phase right now. Maybe you have some interesting learnings here.
Yeah, what I have been saying for the past couple of months to people is to go and read the token spec for tokens. I'm going to drop that in the chat here. It's a document that's being worked on by a group of people in the industry to basically define the format that tokens should be named in or structured in. Go and read it. It's not very long. Go spend an afternoon reading it and trying to understand the format that your naming conventions should be in eventually. If you can understand that and then take that back to your team, you can start to map out what your tokens might be called. I'm just going to drop a few things into the FigJam as well.
Please. And please spotlight yourself. It's hard to find.
Right.
Yeah.
There's so many people now.
Yeah. I also put a reference on the market, which is Atlassian, because they are very powerful on that matter. So as an inspiration, sometimes when you get stuck, it's good to see how others solve as well. And since they're very open about it, just share the link.
Yeah, so I just dropped two things in here, and this is it may be helpful, might not be helpful, but it's just some things I've been playing around with using FigJam tables to try and map out visually what a token structure could look like. If you look at the table headers of the first one, I'm splitting out each different type of the eventual token name into its structure or in its format. And this isn't what you would eventually call them, but it might be useful to put you in the headspace of, okay, what type of variable is it? What pattern are we using? Is it a component? Is there a variation? And what state is it in? And then you can put the values in there if you need to. The one underneath is way simpler. And this is, as in I was working on this afternoon, so it's half baked. But what I'm going to eventually do, I'll eventually publish a FigJam file, which is kind of a starter table for a few different token types. So a background, a border, some text or something like that in a format that is, okay, I need a text default, I need a text hover, I need a text prime, whatever that is. And you can start to then flesh this out in a table before you go and make them. Because as I said before, if you go and make them, then change your mind, you might be in trouble.
Yeah, for sure. And also, I recommend to do this brainstorming with the engineers because eventually they will remember more code needs than only designers, right? Especially if the designer is not mature on CSS and HTML circumstances with engineer. And also because some nomenclature could be more beneficial if it's more code friendly as well. So yeah.
Talk to your developers. They might
have, for sure.
They might already have something that you could use.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. For emotional support.
I still remember spending so much days just discussing with developers because they had to come up with their own names and they had to respect the main design system names. So we had to negotiate. Can we call this something else? Can we do something to fix this? But it's super interesting to think about color naming and all of that stuff. And this gets an extra layer of complexity if you have multiple themes, right?
Yeah.
So now you cannot just call the color lime because it's not going to be lime in some other brand. So now you're screwed. And that's what happened. That happened to the design system at Cargo also at some point, the web design system.
Love it. Well, I have a question. Why variable CPI is available only for enterprise? I was working on the Coda pack and I did it, but I cannot test it. And I was asking all my friends, they all have organization plan. Nobody has enterprise plan because it's $75. Why people made this decision?
So the plugin API is available. It's just the REST API that is not available unless you're an enterprise. Just because we typically find that a pipeline for token generation and importing and exporting is something that typically an enterprise customer would be using. And therefore, that's what the plan that it gets put onto. You can still use the plugin API to do cool things, but that's just our typical finding of the kind of people that are going to be needing to do those things. But as usual, we hear you and we're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, because having at least organization plan, that will be much more easier and it will for sure increase adoption. Yeah, love it. Great. Thank you. Because as you mentioned, for CI/CD, we actually need API. Plugin API is great, but it's working only within Figma itself. But if we also have remote access, it's hard. And I always was telling Louis that please add editing API for Figma. That will be so great. Because right now, most of the times we can just pull data, but we cannot add anything else or edit. And with variables and def resources, we can. But it will be great to have more flexibility there.
Well, it depends. Do you want your product manager updating the file remotely from the API? Is that what you want?
No, it's more about larger organizations where we have multiple design systems, or when we have multiple levels of design system. Global design system and then product libraries. From ops perspective, we're always thinking about how we could create scalable solutions. Yeah. And that's why managing it manually, it's first of all, it's so hard because there's so many data points that you need to update manually. It's hard. So that's why having this API, it will speed up the process for sure.
Yeah, what I think would be really cool is to be able to, particularly from an ops level, is to update statuses between different tools. So using the Figma as my designs are now ready for dev. you automatically know in Coda or whatever you're using that's happened. That link, I think, would be really cool.
Oh, another thing that will be great in analytics, in Figma Analytics, is to focus more on the dev ready statuses.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that our stakeholders are asking, can we focus on the handoff? Because there is a lot of data around conceptual design phase and prototyping, but we want to actually see how many designs were given to engineers and what was the ratio there. So right now with this dev mode, it's available on API. You can check it out. But it will be great to have extra section within Figma Analytics that will focus only on this handoff phase.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Great. Another thing that we wanted to focus on and speak about is focus areas for ops. What kind of things it could give ops people, how we could utilize these variables, not only for design styles, but also we could think about testing data API. So this is, I'm just sharing my thoughts here. Please vote or maybe share your reactions if you feel it might be an interesting idea or not. But one of the things that we had for a long time is how to create this testing data for that is available across multiple disciplines and functions. How we could use the testing data that community team is using, engineers are using, and how we could have it for designers as well. So what if there is a specific amount of text that is not, and right now with wrap components, we can actually test it even more and see how different data size, different data formats might break or change the way how we see how we use these components. So I see some likes there. Another one is, I have a question regarding that, regarding documentation. So the way how we were doing these things, the way how we could connect design library and code library is through these 4 main dimensions. It's assets, SVG icons, logos and everything, styles, color styles, text styles and everything, components. This is our Lego bricks. It could be atoms, molecules, organisms, and all of that. And the last one is patterns. Patterns is more about how to use actually these Lego bricks to create experiences, right? How we are doing onboarding flow, how we are notifying our users of new features that we are creating within the products and making consistent product experience across multiple products. But where variables are located here, is it what's your perspective? How these variables could be related here? Are they a part of every dimension or is there a separate dimension here?
My instinct was, put them in styles, but then a text string might be pattern level. I think that you probably have variables hovering around all of this stuff in Niggle. And each different variable type feeds into different levels of the pattern component, styles, assets even, because an asset might be fed by a variable type. You might have a color that is feeding an asset from a variable. You might have a Boolean that is feeding an asset. Likewise, you might have a component that is being fed by a Boolean. So it's kind of everywhere and nowhere at the same time.
Love it. The last one is content dictionaries. This is, again, variables are not only for styles, as Louis mentioned, is also for the content. So it will be great also to have this content dictionary around different localizations and dictionaries where people could connect. One of the things that I really was passionate about like a couple of years back is data populator, when if you will to show dynamic and static values within your designs, you can use these curly brackets to show this is a part of the data text that will be dynamic and you could put data here. It was coming from 2017 and I was really inspired by this idea, but nobody is adopting this approach still. I don't know. Maybe in the future it will be more. But yeah, having this, again, thinking about variables, and that's why I was thinking about variables API, that will help us to connect the dots between different disciplines and functions. So it's not only helpful for designers, but it's also helping designers bringing gap between engineers, content, marketing, QA, and others.
Yeah, what I found with content strings like that, people are quite hesitant to rename layers to match string values in a different tool. That's probably why adoption hasn't been quite as high as maybe you expected, which is why I think that because variables can be fed with JSON, if you have content strings living somewhere, you could still feed layers with something if you wanted to and kind of follow this model, but maybe just not in the way that we originally thought people would do that.
Perfect. Great. Tiago, would you like to go through some of the things around integrations and dev resources?
Oh, let me check. I'm spotlight. The spotlight is always weird with the weight, but I understand why. No, I think Raquel also has some really cool stuff here, but I was really nerding out with the dev stuff. One of the things that I only noticed when one of my devs spoke with me was that the navigation in the view mode wasn't working the same way as the navigation in the design mode.
Yes.
And so they were trying to click inside. They didn't know they had press command to do that. So that is gone. Now that's a problem that no longer exists. Marking sections as ready for dev. I used to do this both on the page name and on the documentation on the left side, some components. This is amazing. It's here. I just wish that now improve it a little bit further with kind of like a status for, is this implemented yet on Android? Is this implemented on iOS? That's a next step, I guess. We already heard about this in some way.
Yeah, that's a really hard one.
It's
We could
is.
go all the way down to statuses on components or statuses on layers of components if you wanted. It's just about where do you stop and how much fidelity do you need or want in all of these things. But it's definitely something that we hear is, can we do more of that?
Yeah. Then another nice stuff on the dev mode, which is you can see the last edit for each component and frame. So instead of our view, they get, oh, here's this little frame, and now it was last edited on this date. So they will stop asking, hey, is this the last one? Is this the latest stuff? So that is also really good user feedback, getting to hear the problem and the pain. It's easy to see what was changed because now there's a comparison view where you can check side by side as a developer, what has the design been doing, right? And now they can check, oh, this changed. And they can overlay and change the opacity, check what actually moved. That's really nice for developers. And then my mind was blown with this one, really. Checking the original component against the detached component, that is magic. So if someone detaches a component, devs can still save the day by saying, okay, detached, but this is not possible on our component. So I guess you wanted to do this instead.
Yeah, sorry, could you elaborate? Yeah, could you elaborate on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's on the dev panel on the inspect, I think there's a little notion. If a designer detaches a component, there's still an indication there that was detached, and you can actually check the differences from the current one to the original component, so that developers can understand what happened there. Why did they detach it? Right? That's the question that gets answered.
That's really cool.
And then there was one that I noticed right at the end of it all, which is you can now have code completion, which is what your IDE suggests the name that you're going to be using based on the name of the layers on the design you're inspecting on the extension, right? So this is amazing. They can be, instead of coming up with the name or having to go to Figma to check what the designer called it, they can actually get, hey, this is a nav bar. This is this, to get the class name in place just from the design file.
Love it. By the way, speaking about the statuses, we've been using some background colors where this component is currently sitting, because by changing the background color, the feel of the frame, during the search, they were able to see that this specific component has green color or yellow color. And this is the way how we were communicating statuses with the naming conventions. But maybe in the future, yes, that will be great, because this is the thing that everyone is waiting for. And the biggest question that I had is breaking changes. This is the big problem for us. And I know we are out of time, unfortunately, but this is the main question that I have. How people are doing the version control on the component. If it's a breaking change, are you creating a new component? But if you are creating a new component, I was thinking to create some kind of widget plugin that will see based on the naming conventions and will highlight, oh, this is the old component that you're using, but they will not see that in the system. Here's the new component that we've just added because the previous one has some breaking changes. So this is one of the questions that I still have and would love to hear from others how they fix that. Yeah. Unfortunately, we are out of time. But we had so many interesting things. One of the things that I just want to highlight is if you want to play with dev resources, I created CodePack. It's free, so you can just use it and you could connect your different more than 600 tools with your components and just map it at scale. So if you have thousands or hundreds of components, you could just come up with your own ways of filtering and just adding all these dev resources at scale. And also by using Code AI functionality, you could actually map. If there is something similar on the Jira, it will try to map it to the component that is related to, or the same thing applies for the Storybook. So it's all free. Feel free to check it out. That was the purpose of making it open source as well. Great. So thank you very much for finding time, Louis. I know that you are moving right now, so that's why it was. Thank you very much for finding 1 hour for us. We had more things to discuss around AI, latest practices and examples, and navigating change and adopting new processes. But I feel like we covered a lot, and I love that we had more discussion format and debate format instead of just sharing. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. The recording will be ready. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Take care.
Catch you later.
Bye-bye.